How far would you go for family? Is there anything you wouldn't do for your brother? Welcome to Escaping the Echo Chamber. Supernatural is a series about two brothers who literally wind up going to hell and back for each other. I want to talk about two other brothers, two real life brothers. An anchor on CNN named Chris Cuomo and his brother, who is the governor of New York State. Chris Cuomo has his CNN show. He has a guest come on. That guest happens to be his brother. He introduces his brother. This is about to interview Andrew Cuomo, Governor Cuomo, governor of the state of New York, and my brother. Welcome to the show. Andrew Cuomo says, "Thank you for having me." Mom says, "Give her a call." That began last year during the pandemic. Just a recurring event between those two that was at times humor. It was humorous. It was the banter between the two, the sibling rivalry, them trying to one up each other, and the jabs at each other. And it was really funny. It was really entertaining. But it was in the midst of a pandemic. So there was an undercurrent of, what's going on? Because Governor Cuomo had a job to do and things were really, really bad. It was a global pandemic. People were scared to death. Meanwhile, the president of the United States, Donald Trump, is telling everybody, everything's going to be fine. There's nothing to worry about. But the body count is just piling up. Bodies are dropping every single day. And there's a lot of people that weren't reassured by what Donald Trump was saying. In addition to the appearances on Chris Cuomo's show, Andrew Cuomo was doing daily briefings. He was not downplaying the existence of the pandemic. He was letting people know this is serious. People are dying. He was, and he was saying this is what outlining what needed to be done in order to get through this. Among those things, he also had to make decisions as to what was going to happen in the state of New York. Because if you don't remember, New York got hit really, really bad. When the first accounts of COVID showing up in New York, well, in the country, New York was like right there, and they were like, okay, we have a guy who I think he was in New Rochelle, Westchester, and they're like, okay, we've got a guy, he's isolated, he's not going back to work, but then it turns out his family has it. Members of his family. Okay, so now they're like, okay, so now we're looking. And then people started popping up and it just mushroomed. It mushroomed so quickly. So New York really had to do some things in order to address the numbers that were just spiraling out of control here in New York. I remember during the pandemic, my mom called me and she's like, Donald Trump is just so horrible, so horrible. He's just lying and he's just pretending that nothing's happening. And this sentiment was felt by a lot of people. But then my mom said something else to me. She said, "I'm glad you're in New York, though. Your governor has everything under control." The numbers in New York State were getting bad. If you don't remember, at the time, New York had the most deaths, in the country. And so people were wondering, like, what's happening? But the governor, Andrew Cuomo, stepped up and said, hey, we're going to institute not a lockdown, but we're going to limit the activity in New York. because the mayor had actually said we're going to need a lockdown, and he didn't like that language. Cuomo didn't like that language, but he instituted a policy that, to shut down gyms, movie theaters, to stop non-essential travel. And, that was the hope that would stop the numbers from just ballooning even further. Meanwhile, Trump is still doing his thing, and a lot of people weren't convinced, especially here in New York. Nobody was convinced by the things that Donald Trump was saying, and people were starting to say, wait a minute, there's a contrast between these two individuals. If you look at Trump, who's just making stuff up, he doesn't know what he's doing, he's lying, and it's obvious. Meanwhile, Andrew Cuomo is here having these daily briefings where, he was authoritative, and, he would have these graphs and, just explain what's going on and what they hope to accomplish with the moves they're making. There were some critics. One of them was Janice Dean, who is a meteorologist from Fox News. She works from Fox News. So that had to be why she was criticizing Cuomo, right? Right? Her critiques were based on something happening with the nursing homes. Her in-laws had been in nursing homes, and people were wondering why Andrew Cuomo, was sending people who had tested positive back to nursing homes. And they were saying, wait a minute, this is a bad idea. This is dangerous. You shouldn't be doing this. You're going to put people at risk. People were like, what are the numbers? People were asking about the numbers of people that are dying, because even though all over the state people are dying, the numbers coming out of nursing homes were starting to look a little worrisome. But the numbers that we were told were, they were bad, but it was like, hey, during the pandemic, there were a lot of people getting sick, a lot of people dying, and one of the particularly scary moments, but touching, when Chris Cuomo contracted COVID-19 himself. We got to see a softer side of Andrew Cuomo, who talked about how much he loved his brother. And even though he said, oh, he's going to be fine, you could tell he was worried. I mean, understandably. If we've seen people die from this disease, somebody gets it, it doesn't matter what the percentages are, you're worried. And we got to see some interviews with them while Chris Cuomo had COVID that were really touching moments between a television personality who was, who's known to be able to get tough with an interview, and the governor who has a larger than life personality. But we got to see two brothers connecting with each other. And during the time of when so much is going wrong, it reassured so many people. We've also got the presidential race. Biden was taking the lead versus Bernie Sanders, but he just wasn't looking like a strong candidate. If you don't remember, at that time, Andrew Cuomo was doing such a good job at calming people and reassuring people that people were actually saying, you know what? He should be more than just the governor of New York. He should jump in the race. Now, he hadn't been campaigning. He hadn't declared to run for president of the United States. And in fact, right now, like the primaries had already started. And people were calling on Andrew Cuomo to jump in the race and run for president against Donald Trump. I remember talking to people in the street. People would be like, yeah, it's just so great that he's here. It would be great if he ran for president, if he jumped in the race, because he's exuding the authority. He's actual presidential material. And right now what we have is just, they were disgusted with Donald Trump, and people were just really, really excited about the possibility that Andrew Cuomo could jump in the race. But he said, hey, listen, I'm the governor of the state of New York. I'm not running for president. But something did happen. He announced that he had a book coming out, a book dealing with how he handled the pandemic and how he saved New York. Leadership. That was the name of the book. When it dropped in October, it was a bestseller. Instantly. People were like, wow, even though he didn't jump in the race, they were like, this is great. He's such a great leader. He displayed a contrast in leadership to Donald Trump. He could have ran for president, but he chose to stay in New York and save New York State. But there were rumblings of other things now starting to happen. One woman comes forward late in 2020 and says that Andrew Cuomo sexually harassed her. Now, this woman happened to be running for office, so some people were like, hey, is she trying to get publicity? This is, people like, listen, this dude did his thing. He saved New York. This is the woman that comes forward and says that Andrew Cuomo sexually harassed her, decided she wasn't going to provide any details. That story appeared to die down. But then something else happened. The Attorney General of the state of New York came out with a report concerning the nursing home situation. And now people started remembering what Janice Dean, that woman from Fox, that meteorologist from Fox News, because what the Democratic State Attorney General found was that Andrew Cuomo's administration lied about the numbers. They had downplayed the amount of people that died in nursing homes. People started questioning Cuomo about it. One of the things he said is, hey, they died. They died. Who cares how they died, where they died? That made headlines, and it wasn't a great look. But what happened next was really earth-shattering. One of Cuomo's top aides was on a call with fellow Democrats and told them, we downplayed the numbers, but we did it because we didn't want to look bad in front of Trump. When she said this, Democrats on the call actually started texting each other saying, did she really just admit to that? The story blew up. Now everybody was calling for an investigation. They're like, this is crazy. You intentionally lied about the numbers and provided false information. People started looking into this, but now people turned to the media and say, hey, media, you should be covering this. And more media started actually covering it. But there was one media outlet that stepped back. People said, hey, CNN, what are you waiting for? Cover it. This is a big story. CNN eventually said, okay, we'll cover it. But there was one report at CNN that said, I'm not covering it. Because more stuff started coming out about Andrew Cuomo. More women started coming forward saying he had sexually harassed them. But his brother, Chris Cuomo, came out and said, listen, I interviewed him in the past. I'm not covering this story. I can't remain objective, so I'm not touching the story. People were upset. People were like, wait a minute. If you could cover your brother and y'all could play games and have this friendly banter, you should be covering this story. But CNN stepped forward and said, no. We're putting a moratorium on this. We don't want him covering the story. We're going to keep this. We, as a network, will cover the story. Chris Cuomo will not. People were criticizing Andrew Cuomo for his coverage of, for his handling of the pandemic. Now people started actually saying, wait a minute. Even though you were hailed as the hero your state had some of the worst numbers in the country. In fact, if you look at the numbers in New York State, California has the worst numbers of the country, the highest death toll. New York is number 2. New York State. Because if you look at the CDC website, you'll see California, Texas, Florida, then New York. Then New York City. New York State is a couple of lines down, but when you add up New York State and New York City, that is the second most deaths in the country. So people are now like, wait a minute, this like how is this guy the hero of the pandemic when he had some of the worst numbers in the state, in the country? Plus, he was sending COVID positive people to nursing homes, resulted in this massive death toll, and he covered it up. And then we had these reports about him sexually harassing and these allegations of him sexually harassing female staff. And this is the guy that you're held up on this pedestal as the hero of the pandemic. And he wrote a book. He wrote a book about leadership in the midst of this pandemic. And this is the guy you held up as a hero. How much money did he get? People were asking that question, and this week we found out. $5 million. $5 million to write a book about leadership in the midst of a global pandemic when your state had numbers that were among the worst in the country. But that's not all. Because this week we also found out something else. We found out that with all these scandals falling down on and just bombarding Andrew Cuomo, he had help. Somebody actually was sitting with him and discussing with him and his staff how he should handle the scandals. That person was his brother, Chris Cuomo. People are up in arms. People are saying this is outrageous. This is crazy. How can this happen? Where is the journalistic integrity? CNN has come out and said, listen, we know that he has contact with his brother, and we knew that that would be a problem. That's why he hasn't been covering the story. However, we are concerned that he apparently sat down with members of the governor's staff as well, communicated with members of the governor's staff as well as the governor in crafting a strategy. They said, we're not going to allow that to continue any longer. But what is Chris Cuomo doing? He's standing up for his brother. These are two brothers that looked out for each other. Remember? At the outset, I asked, how far would you go for your family? I'm asking you again, how far would you go? What's more important than family? Is truth more important than family? Is integrity more important than family? Is duty more important than family? What about the lives of thousands of people? Is that more important than family? I'll let you make the choice. Thank you for checking out this episode of Escaping the Echo Chamber. And as always, don't forget to give a thumbs up, like, share, subscribe. Check out some of the other videos I have on the channel. And I'll see you next time.